What happens when a centuries-old royal tradition collides with modern family drama? When Queen Isabella of Valdoria discovered that priceless crown jewels had vanished from the royal vault, she never imagined the trail would lead to the palace's most trusted confidant. In a kingdom where honor and duty reign supreme, sometimes the greatest threats come from within the castle walls themselves. This is the story of betrayal, forgiveness, and the weight of a crown that threatens to destroy the very family it was meant to protect. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Valdoria Palace as Queen Isabella made her way to the royal vault. It was a routine she had followed for 23 years, ever since ascending to the throne after her father's unexpected passing. The vault inspection was scheduled for the first Tuesday of every month, a tradition that dated back for centuries to King Edmund the Wise, who had established the practice after a devastating theft nearly bankrupted the kingdom. Isabella's heels clicked against the polished stone as she descended the winding staircase that led to the vault's entrance. The air grew cooler with each step, and the familiar scent of aged wood and metal polish filled her nostrils. Behind her, the steady footsteps of Marcus Henley, the chief royal custodian, provided a comforting rhythm. Marcus had served the royal family for 37 years, starting as a young page during her grandfather's reign. "The security reports have been clean this month, Your Majesty," Marcus said, his voice echoing slightly in the narrow corridor. "No unusual activities detected by the monitoring systems, and all access logs show only authorized personnel." Isabella nodded, though something felt different this morning. Perhaps it was the conversation she'd had with her son Prince Alexander the night before, where he'd questioned the necessity of maintaining such elaborate security for what he called old trinkets gathering dust. Or maybe it was the persistent rumors circulating in the tabloid press about financial troubles within the royal household, rumors that had no basis in fact but still managed to unsettle her. The vault's massive steel door came into view, its surface adorned with the royal coat of arms and an intricate lock mechanism that required 3 separate keys. Isabella produced her key from the chain around her neck, while Marcus retrieved his from a secured case. The third key belonged to the Prime Minister's office, a fail-safe measure implemented after the civil unrest of 1847. As the heavy door swung open with its characteristic groan, Isabella stepped into the temperature-controlled chamber that housed Valdoria's most precious treasures. The vault was divided into several sections, each containing different categories of royal artifacts. There were portraits of ancient monarchs, ceremonial weapons dating back to medieval times, religious artifacts blessed by long-dead bishops, and, most importantly, the crown jewels. The crown jewels of Valdoria were legendary throughout Europe. The centerpiece was the crown of Saint Adelheid, crafted in 1203 and adorned with sapphires that supposedly came from the Holy Land during the Crusades. Alongside it sat the Queen Mother's tiara, a delicate piece featuring hundreds of pearls and diamonds arranged in intricate floral patterns. The royal scepter, made of pure gold and topped with the famous Star of Valdoria diamond, completed the primary collection. Isabella approached the glass display case that housed the crown jewels, her trained eye immediately beginning its inspection. She had memorized every detail of each piece over the years, from the smallest pearl to the precise angle of each gem's setting. It was during this careful examination that she first noticed something was wrong. The Queen Mother's tiara was missing 3 pearls from its left side, not just loose or fallen into the case, but completely gone, leaving behind small, empty settings that caught the overhead lighting like tiny accusatory eyes. Isabella's breath caught in her throat as she leaned closer, hoping her eyes were deceiving her. "Marcus," she called, her voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in her mind. "Come look at this." The elderly custodian hurried over, adjusting his glasses as he peered into the display case. His face went pale as he spotted the missing pearls. "Your Majesty, this is impossible. The case hasn't been opened since last month's inspection. The security systems would have detected any breach." Isabella's mind raced through the possibilities. The pearls weren't loose gems that could simply fall off with age. They were professionally mounted and would require skilled hands and proper tools to remove without damaging the surrounding setting. This was deliberate tampering, not natural deterioration. "Who has accessed this vault since our last inspection?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Only 3 people had the authority and means to enter the vault: herself, Marcus, and Lady Catherine Whitmore, her longtime companion and confidant who served as the royal collections manager. Marcus consulted his electronic tablet, scrolling through the access logs with trembling fingers. Besides our regular monthly inspections, Lady Catherine entered the vault twice in the past 3 weeks. Once on the 15th to conduct her quarterly photographic documentation, and again on the 22nd to oversee the cleaning of the medieval weapons display. Lady Catherine Whitmore had been Isabella's closest friend since childhood. They had grown up together in the palace, Catherine being the daughter of the former prime minister. When Isabella became queen, she had appointed Catherine to the prestigious position of Royal Collections Manager, a role that came with significant trust and responsibility. Catherine had never married, dedicating her entire life to serving the crown and managing the royal artifacts with meticulous care. The idea that Catherine could be involved in theft was almost unthinkable, yet the evidence was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Isabella forced herself to examine the rest of the crown jewels with clinical detachment, her trained eye searching for any other irregularities. What she found made her stomach turn. The Star of Valdoria diamond in the royal scepter appeared different. Not missing, but somehow less brilliant than she remembered. Upon closer inspection, she realized it had been replaced with a very high-quality fake. The craftsmanship was excellent, good enough to fool a casual observer, but Isabella knew every facet of the original stone. This was not the same diamond that had adorned the royal scepter for over 300 years. The discovery sent shockwaves through her system. If Catherine was responsible for these thefts, it represented not just a betrayal of trust, but a violation of everything the royal family stood for. The crown jewels weren't merely valuable objects. They were symbols of continuity, tradition, and the sacred bond between the monarchy and the people of Valdoria. Isabella spent the next hour conducting a thorough inventory of the entire vault with Marcus. They discovered that several other pieces had been similarly compromised. A medieval chalice was missing its ruby centerpiece, replaced with what appeared to be colored glass. 2 silver coins from the ancient collection had been swapped for obvious forgeries. Each theft was subtle, clearly the work of someone who understood the collection intimately and knew which pieces would be missed least quickly. As they completed their grim catalog, Isabella's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Catherine. "Good morning, Your Majesty. I'm running a bit late for our tea appointment this afternoon. Looking forward to discussing the upcoming charity auction. The pieces you selected will fetch wonderful prices for the Children's Hospital." The irony was crushing. Catherine had been helping to organize a charity auction where some of the royal collection's less significant pieces would be sold to benefit the kingdom's largest children's hospital. It was exactly the kind of noble cause that Catherine had always championed, using her position to help those in need. Now, reading the message in light of the morning's discoveries, Isabella wondered if this legitimate auction had somehow provided cover for more sinister activities. Marcus cleared his throat gently. "Your Majesty, what are your instructions? Should I contact the royal guard immediately?" Isabella stared at the display case, her reflection ghost-like in the protective glass. The weight of the crown seemed heavier today, pressing down on her shoulders with the accumulated burden of centuries of tradition. She thought about her grandfather's words, spoken to her on the day of her coronation. A monarch must sometimes choose between justice and mercy, but never between right and wrong. "Not yet, Marcus," she said finally. "I need to understand what's really happening here before we take any irreversible steps. Schedule a private meeting with Lady Catherine for this evening. Tell her I want to review the auction preparations in my private study." "And Marcus," she paused, meeting his concerned gaze. "Not a word of this to anyone until we know more." As they locked the vault and climbed the stairs back to the main palace, Isabella's mind was already working through the implications. If Catherine was indeed responsible for the thefts, the scandal could rock the very foundations of the monarchy. The press would have a field day, and the public's trust in the royal family would be severely damaged. But if there was another explanation, if Catherine was somehow innocent or being manipulated, then Isabella needed to find the truth before jumping to conclusions. The afternoon sun was streaming through the tall windows of the palace corridors as Isabella made her way to her private chambers. She had a kingdom to run, official duties to attend to, and diplomatic meetings that couldn't be postponed. But underneath it all, the mystery of the missing crown jewels gnawed at her consciousness like a persistent ache. She thought about the upcoming charity auction, about Catherine's years of faithful service, about the sacred trust that had been placed in her as monarch. Whatever the truth might be, Isabella knew that by evening, she would have to confront one of the most painful situations of her reign. The very person she trusted most with the kingdom's treasures might be the one systematically stealing them. As she settled into her desk to review the day's official correspondence, Isabella couldn't shake the image of those empty pearl settings, like tiny wounds in the crown that had adorned the heads of her ancestors for generations. The crown of Saint Adelheid sat in its case below, unaware that its companion piece had been violated, its integrity compromised by someone who should have been its greatest protector. The afternoon stretched ahead of her, filled with the ordinary responsibilities of monarchy, but Isabella knew that nothing would feel ordinary until she discovered the truth about what was happening in the vault beneath her feet. The kingdom of Valdoria had survived wars, revolutions, and political upheavals over the centuries, but this quiet betrayal from within felt like a different kind of threat altogether. Evening could not come soon enough, yet Isabella dreaded the conversation that awaited her. In a few short hours, she would look her oldest friend in the eye and ask questions that could destroy their relationship forever. The crown jewels represented the continuity of the royal line, but tonight, Isabella feared that continuity itself might be at risk. The clock in Isabella's private study chimed 7 times as she arranged the documents on her mahogany desk. The auction catalogs and charity paperwork provided the perfect cover for what would undoubtedly be the most difficult conversation of her reign. Through the tall windows, she could see the palace gardens bathed in the golden light of sunset, where she and Catherine had spent countless hours as children, planning imaginary kingdoms and making promises of eternal friendship. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Your Majesty, Lady Catherine has arrived," announced her personal secretary, Elena Vasquez, a woman whose discretion had proved invaluable over the years. "Send her in, Elena, and please ensure we're not disturbed for the next hour." Catherine entered the study with her characteristic grace, carrying a leather portfolio filled with auction materials. At 51, she remained strikingly elegant, her silver hair pulled back in a sophisticated chignon that complemented her navy blue suit. Her smile was warm and genuine as she approached the desk, showing no signs of the guilt or nervousness Isabella had been watching for. "Isabella, you look tired," Catherine said with the familiarity of their lifelong friendship. "These diplomatic meetings with the Eastern European delegates have been exhausting you. Perhaps we should postpone the auction preparations until next week." The genuine concern in Catherine's voice made Isabella's task even more difficult. She gestured to the chairs arranged before the fireplace, away from the formal setting of her desk. "No, let's proceed. But first, I'd like to discuss something else. Something that's been troubling me greatly." Catherine settled into her chair, crossing her legs and opening her portfolio. "Of course, you know you can tell me anything." Isabella took a deep breath, steeling herself for what came next. "This morning during the vault inspection, Marcus and I discovered some irregularities with the crown jewels. Items are missing, Catherine. Pearls from the Queen Mother's tiara, and the Star of Valdoria has been replaced with a fake." The change in Catherine's expression was immediate and unmistakable. The color drained from her face, and her hands trembled slightly as she set down her portfolio. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the crackling of logs in the fireplace. "Isabella, I can explain," Catherine whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's not what you think." "Then, tell me what it is," Isabella replied, her tone carefully controlled. "Because from where I sit, it appears that someone with intimate knowledge of our collection and access to the vault has been systematically stealing from the crown jewels. The access logs show that you've been the only person in that vault besides Marcus and myself." Catherine's composure crumbled completely. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red with tears and filled with a mixture of shame and desperation that Isabella had never seen before. "You're right," Catherine admitted. "I took them. The pearls, the diamond, the ruby from the chalice. But, Isabella, please listen to me. I never intended for this to happen. It started so innocently, and then everything spiraled out of control." The confession hit Isabella like a physical blow, even though she had been preparing herself for this possibility all day. Hearing the words spoken aloud made the betrayal real in a way that mere suspicion could not. "How could you do this, Catherine? After everything we've shared, everything you've sworn to protect?" Catherine wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse, struggling to compose herself enough to speak coherently. "It started 18 months ago when my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. You remember how quickly she deteriorated? The private care facility she needed wasn't covered by our medical system, and the costs were astronomical. I had savings, but they were depleted within 6 months." Isabella remembered Catherine's mother, Margaret Whitmore, who had served as the palace's head librarian for over 20 years. Margaret had been like a second mother to Isabella during her childhood, teaching her about the kingdom's history and helping her understand the weight of her future responsibilities. I explored every legitimate option, Catherine continued, her voice growing stronger as she explained. I applied for loans, contacted charities, even considered selling my family's estate. But nothing was enough. The medical bills were crushing me, and Mother needed specialized care that cost thousands every month. You should have come to me, Isabella said, though she could hear the hurt in her own voice. We could have found a way to help. The royal family has discretionary funds for exactly these kinds of situations. Catherine's laugh was bitter and self-deprecating. Don't you see? That's exactly why I couldn't ask you. I've spent my entire adult life building a reputation based on integrity and independence. I was supposed to be your trusted advisor, not another person looking for royal charity. My pride wouldn't let me admit that I couldn't handle my own family crisis. So instead you decided to steal from the crown jewels. It wasn't planned, Catherine said desperately. I was conducting the quarterly photographic documentation when I noticed how easily some of the smaller gems could be removed. The pearls on the tiara were loose anyway. They needed professional attention. I told myself I was just taking them for repair, that I would find a way to replace them before anyone noticed. Isabella stood and walked to the window, staring out at the gardens where their friendship had begun. And the Star of Valdoria? That's not a loose pearl, Catherine. That required planning, expertise, and considerable deception. I found a gemologist in Switzerland who could create perfect replicas, Catherine admitted. He asked no questions as long as the payment was sufficient. I told myself that if the fakes were good enough, no one would ever know. The real gems could be sold quietly to private collectors, and the money would go directly to Mother's care. How many pieces, Catherine? I need to know the full extent of what we're dealing with. Catherine opened her portfolio and withdrew a handwritten list, her hands still trembling. 7 pieces total over the past 18 months. 3 pearls from the tiara, the Star of Valdoria, the ruby from the medieval chalice, 2 silver coins, and, she paused, taking a shaky breath, the small sapphire from King Edmund's ceremonial ring. Isabella felt as though the floor had shifted beneath her feet. King Edmund's ring was one of the most historically significant pieces in the collection, its sapphire supposedly blessed by the Pope himself during Edmund's coronation. Catherine, that sapphire has been in that ring for over 4 centuries. It's irreplaceable. I know, Catherine whispered. I know what I've done is unforgivable. But, Isabella, you have to understand. I watched my mother, this brilliant woman who taught us about honor and duty, slowly lose herself to this horrible disease. She stopped recognizing me. She became frightened and confused in the public care facility. The private clinic was the only place where she was calm, where she was treated with dignity. Isabella turned back to face her oldest friend, studying the woman she had trusted with the kingdom's most precious artifacts. She could see the genuine anguish in Catherine's face, the weight of guilt that had been consuming her for months. But she could also see something else, relief. After carrying this secret for so long, Catherine seemed almost grateful to finally share the burden. Where are the original pieces now? Isabella asked. Some have been sold already. The proceeds went directly to the medical bills. The Star of Valdoria and King Edmund's sapphire are still in my possession. I was planning to sell them after the charity auction, when the attention would be focused elsewhere. Isabella returned to her chair, her mind racing through the implications. Do you realize what this means, Catherine? The scandal alone could damage the monarchy's reputation for generations. If the press discovers that the royal collections manager has been stealing crown jewels, every piece in our collection will be questioned. The public's trust in our stewardship will be shattered. I've thought about nothing else for months, Catherine said. The guilt has been eating me alive. There were nights when I considered confessing everything, but I kept thinking about Mother, about how she would be affected if I went to prison. She's all I have left in the world. What about the charity auction? Were you planning to steal from that as well? Catherine's face showed genuine shock. Never. Isabella, despite what I've done, I would never betray the trust of those children. Every penny from the auction will go to the hospital, exactly as planned. Whatever else you might think of me, please believe that. Isabella studied her friend's face, searching for any sign of deception. After a lifetime of reading Catherine's expressions, she believed this assertion was true. It provided some small comfort in an otherwise devastating situation. The gemologist in Switzerland, Isabella said. Can he be trusted to remain silent? He's been paid well for his discretion, and He has an international reputation to protect. He believes I'm a private collector who wanted replicas made for insurance purposes while keeping the originals in a safety deposit box. And the pieces you've already sold? Can they be traced back to the royal collection? Catherine shook her head. The sales were conducted through intermediaries, private dealers who specialize in estate jewelry. The provenance was deliberately obscured. The buyers believe they're purchasing pieces from old European nobility, not the crown jewels of Valdoria. Isabella fell silent, contemplating the magnitude of the crisis facing them. On one hand, Catherine's betrayal cut her to the core. The violation of trust was profound, and the potential damage to the monarchy's reputation was incalculable. On the other hand, she could understand the desperate circumstances that had led to these choices, and she knew that Catherine's actions, while inexcusable, had come from love rather than greed. "There's something else you need to know," Catherine said quietly. "Prince Alexander approached me last month about the possibility of modernizing the royal collection. He suggested that some pieces could be sold to fund various charitable initiatives. He doesn't know what I've done, but his comments made me realize that my actions might not be discovered for years if the monarchy decides to reduce the collection anyway." This revelation added another layer of complexity to an already complicated situation. Alexander had indeed mentioned such ideas to Isabella, though she had dismissed them as the idealistic notions of a young prince who didn't fully understand the historical significance of the crown jewels. "Catherine, I need to ask you something, and I want complete honesty. Is there any chance that someone else knows about what you've done? Anyone who might be blackmailing you or forcing you to continue?" "No," Catherine replied immediately. "This was entirely my decision, my crime. No one else is involved." Isabella stood and walked to her desk, where she kept a small silver bell that she had inherited from her grandmother. She rang at once, and Elena appeared at the door within moments. "Elena, please contact Dr. Reginald Hayes at the Royal Medical Center. Ask him to come to the palace immediately for a confidential consultation. Tell him it concerns Lady Catherine's mother." After Elena departed, Isabella returned to the fireplace, where Catherine sat in stunned silence. "What are you doing?" Catherine asked. "I'm going to help you save your mother," Isabella replied. "But first, you're going to help me save the crown." Dr. Reginald Hayes arrived at the palace within an hour, his gray beard and kind eyes reflecting the wisdom of 4 decades treating the royal family and their closest associates. He had delivered Prince Alexander, treated Isabella through childhood illnesses, and had been Margaret Whitmore's personal physician before her condition required specialized care. His discretion was absolute, and his loyalty to the crown unquestioned. Isabella received him in her private sitting room, where Catherine waited with red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands. The fireplace cast dancing shadows on the walls lined with portraits of Isabella's ancestors, their painted eyes seeming to watch the unfolding drama with ancient wisdom. "Dr. Hayes," Isabella began, "I need you to explain Margaret Whitmore's condition to me in detail. Not as a physician speaking to the Queen, but as a friend helping us understand what Catherine has been facing alone." The elderly doctor settled into his chair, his expression grave. "Your Majesty, Mrs. Whitmore's case is particularly aggressive. Early-onset Alzheimer's combined with severe anxiety and paranoid episodes. She requires round-the-clock specialized care, not just for her safety, but for her comfort and dignity." Catherine spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "She doesn't recognize me anymore, but when she's in the public facility, she becomes terrified. She thinks people are trying to hurt her. The private clinic has staff trained specifically for these symptoms. She's calmer there, more peaceful. The costs are substantial," Dr. Hayes continued. "Approximately £8,000 per month, and that's expected to increase as her condition deteriorates. Without specialized care, patients like Mrs. Whitmore often decline rapidly, both physically and mentally." Isabella absorbed this information, understanding now why Catherine had felt so desperate. £8,000 monthly was beyond the reach of most families, even those with comfortable incomes like Catherine's salary as Royal Collections Manager. "Dr. Hayes, is there any way the Royal Medical Fund could cover these costs? Perhaps if we classified Mrs. Whitmore's condition as a result of her years of service to the Crown?" The physician shook his head regretfully. "I've already explored that possibility, Your Majesty. The medical fund covers active employees and their immediate families, but Mrs. Whitmore retired 15 years ago. The rules are quite specific, and changing them would require parliamentary approval, which could take months or even years." Catherine looked up at Isabella with surprise. "You tried to find a way to help already?" Of course I did. When Dr. Hayes first informed me of your mother's condition, I asked him to investigate all possible options. I should have told you, but I didn't want to raise false hopes if nothing came of it. This revelation brought fresh tears to Catherine's eyes. You knew about mother's condition and tried to help, yet I still. She couldn't finish the sentence. Isabella moved to the window, watching the palace guards conduct their evening patrol. The routine of their duties reminded her of the weight of her own responsibilities. We're going to fix this, Catherine. Both the immediate problem and the larger crisis you've created. But it will require complete honesty and cooperation from you. Anything, Catherine said immediately. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Isabella had spent the past hour formulating a plan, weighing the risks and benefits of various approaches. The solution she had in mind was complex and would require careful execution, but it offered the best chance of protecting both Catherine and the crown. Here's what we're going to do, Isabella announced, turning to face both Catherine and Dr. Hayes. First, the Royal Medical Fund will be expanded through a special emergency provision. I'll use my personal discretionary funds to cover Mrs. Whitmore's care retroactively and going forward. Catherine started to protest, but Isabella held up a hand to silence her. This isn't charity, Catherine. It's the right thing to do. Your mother served this family faithfully for over 20 years. Her medical care is our responsibility, and it should have been from the beginning. But, Your Majesty, the Parliament will need to approve such an expansion, Dr. Hayes interjected. Not if it's funded through the Queen's private purse, Isabella replied. I have the authority to make emergency provisions for exceptional circumstances. This certainly qualifies. Catherine was crying again, but these were tears of relief rather than despair. Isabella, I don't know what to say. This is more generosity than I deserve. That brings us to the second part of the plan, Isabella continued, her tone becoming more serious. The stolen gems must be recovered. All of them. The ones you still have will be returned immediately. The ones you've sold must be bought back, regardless of cost. The dealers who handled the sales will require significant premiums to reverse the transactions, Catherine warned. They'll know they have us at a disadvantage. Money is not the issue here. The integrity of the crown jewels is priceless. I'll provide whatever funds are necessary to recover every piece. Isabella moved to her desk and withdrew a leather-bound ledger. The royal family maintains a discretionary fund for exactly these kinds of crises. It's rarely used, but it exists for situations where the monarchy's reputation must be protected at all costs. Dr. Hayes looked confused. Your Majesty, I'm honored by your trust, but why am I being included in these discussions? Because you're going to help us with the third part of the plan, Isabella replied. We need a cover story that explains Catherine's recent financial stress and subsequent relief. You're going to recommend that Mrs. Whitmore be transferred to a new experimental treatment program, one that's suddenly become available through international medical cooperation. The physician's eyes widened as he understood his role. You want me to create a fictional medical opportunity that explains how Mrs. Whitmore's care became affordable. Not fictional, Isabella corrected. I'm going to fund the creation of such a program. The Royal Medical Research Foundation will partner with the Swiss clinic where Mrs. Whitmore is currently receiving care. We'll establish a pilot program for Alzheimer's research that provides free treatment to qualifying patients. Catherine stared at Isabella in amazement. You're going to create an entire medical program just to provide cover for helping my mother? I'm going to create a medical program that helps people like your mother, Isabella clarified. The fact that it solves our immediate problem is secondary to its genuine value. This program will outlive both of us and help countless families facing similar crises. Dr. Hayes nodded slowly, his medical mind already working through the possibilities. Such a program would indeed be valuable, Your Majesty. I could work with the Swiss clinic to develop legitimate research protocols. The program could even publish findings that advance Alzheimer's treatment. Exactly. Now, for the fourth part of the plan, Isabella continued. Catherine will take a temporary leave of absence from her duties as Royal Collections Manager. Officially, this will be to spend time with her mother during her participation in the experimental program. Unofficially, it will give us time to quietly restore the crown jewels and ensure that every piece is properly authenticated. Who will manage the auction preparations? Catherine asked, her professional instincts still functioning despite her emotional state. Marcus will oversee the auction with assistance from the Royal Antiquities Department. It will actually be good for him to take on expanded responsibilities. He's been hoping for more authority for years. Isabella returned to her chair, facing Catherine directly. The final part of the plan concerns your future, Catherine. What you've done cannot be undone, and trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild. After your leave of absence, you'll return to a modified role within the royal household, not as collections manager, but as director of royal charitable initiatives. Catherine's face showed confusion mixed with hope. What would that position involve? You'll oversee the new medical research program and coordinate other charitable activities on behalf of the Crown. It's meaningful work that utilizes your organizational skills while keeping you away from direct access to valuable artifacts. It's also a position that reflects the lessons we've both learned from this crisis. The room fell silent as the three of them contemplated the scope of what Isabella was proposing. It was elegant in its complexity, addressing both the immediate crisis and the long-term implications while creating something genuinely beneficial from a tragic situation. Dr. Hayes spoke first. Your Majesty, this plan would indeed work from a medical and public relations standpoint. The research program could be announced within a month, and Mrs. Whitmore could be enrolled immediately as one of the first participants. Catherine was struggling to process the magnitude of Isabella's forgiveness and generosity. Isabella, why are you doing this for me? After what I've done, you could have me arrested, stripped of my title, expelled from the palace forever. Instead, you're saving my mother's life and offering me a new career. Isabella considered the question carefully before responding. Because you're my oldest friend, and because I understand the impossible position you were in. What you did was wrong, Catherine. Inexcusably wrong. But it came from love, not greed. And because, she paused, looking around the room filled with centuries of royal history. The monarchy itself is about forgiveness and redemption as much as it is about justice and tradition. There will be conditions, Isabella continued, her tone becoming more formal. Complete financial transparency going forward. Regular oversight of your new role. And, most importantly, your absolute commitment to rebuilding the trust you've broken. Of course, Catherine agreed immediately. Whatever you require. There's one more thing, Isabella said, her voice softening. I want you to promise me that if you ever face a crisis like this again, you'll come to me immediately. No pride, no independence, no fear of asking for help. We're stronger together than apart. And that's been true since we were children. Catherine nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. I promise, Isabella. I swear on my mother's life that I will never deceive you again. Dr. Hayes stood to leave, understanding that his part of the evening was complete. I'll begin working on the medical program proposal immediately, Your Majesty. Give me 72 hours to draft a comprehensive plan. After he departed, Isabella and Catherine sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low in the grate. The weight of the day's revelations hung between them, but so did the relief of having found a path forward. The gems you still have, Isabella said eventually. I'll need them returned tomorrow morning. They're in my private safe at home. I can bring them first thing. And the contact information for the Swiss gemologist and the dealers who handled the sales? Catherine reached into her purse and withdrew a small notebook. Everything is here. Names, dates, transaction details. I kept meticulous records, thinking they would help me keep track of what needed to be repurchased eventually. Isabella accepted the notebook, scanning its contents briefly. The level of detail was both impressive and heartbreaking, showing just how methodically Catherine had planned each theft while simultaneously documenting her own crimes. We'll begin the recovery process immediately, Isabella said. I estimate it will take 6 to 8 weeks to locate and repurchase all the sold pieces, assuming the current owners are willing to sell. And if they're not willing? Isabella's expression hardened slightly. Then, we'll explore other options. The crown jewels belong to the people of Valdoria, not to private collectors who unknowingly purchase stolen goods. I have resources and influence that extend far beyond our kingdom's borders. As the evening wound down, both women understood that their relationship had fundamentally changed. The easy trust of childhood friendship had been replaced by something more complex, but potentially stronger, a bond forged through crisis, forgiveness, and mutual dependence. The road ahead would be challenging, but they would walk it together, as they had walked every important path in their lives since childhood. The following morning brought a flurry of carefully orchestrated activity within the palace walls. Catherine arrived at dawn with a small velvet pouch containing the Star of Valdoria and King Edmund's sapphire, their brilliance seeming to mock the gravity of the previous night's revelations. Isabella examined each piece under a magnifying glass, confirming their authenticity before locking them in her personal safe. Within hours, Dr. Hayes had submitted his preliminary proposal for the Royal Medical Research Foundation's Alzheimer's program, complete with scientific protocols that would satisfy even the most skeptical reviewers. The Swiss clinic had responded enthusiastically to the partnership proposal, seeing both the prestige and funding opportunities it represented. Meanwhile, Isabella's private secretary Elena had begun the delicate process of contacting the Swiss gemologist. Working through intermediaries and coded communications, they arranged a confidential meeting in Geneva for the following week. The mission was simple: convince the craftsman to recreate the stolen gems using his original molds and measurements, while ensuring his continued silence about the entire affair. The real challenge lay in recovering the pieces that had already been sold. Catherine's notebook revealed a complex web of transactions involving dealers in London, Paris, and New York. Each sale had been carefully structured to obscure the gems' origins, making their recovery a diplomatic and financial challenge of the highest order. Isabella's first call was to Sir Richard Pemberton, a discreet art recovery specialist who had previously helped the royal family reclaim stolen paintings after World War II. His reputation for handling sensitive situations with absolute confidentiality made him the perfect choice for this delicate mission. "Sir Richard," Isabella said during their secure phone conversation, "I have a situation that requires your unique expertise. Several pieces of jewelry with significant sentimental value have entered the private market through unfortunate circumstances. I need them recovered quietly and quickly." "Your Majesty," Sir Richard replied in his cultured Oxford accent, "I understand completely. Such situations are more common than one might think among European nobility. Family financial pressures sometimes force difficult decisions. Shall I assume that discretion is paramount?" "Absolutely. The sellers acted out of desperation rather than malice, and I want to resolve this matter without scandal or legal complications." Sir Richard's fee was substantial, but Isabella authorized it without hesitation. The man's success rate was nearly perfect, and his methods, while expensive, were entirely legitimate. He specialized in convincing private collectors that selling back recently acquired pieces was in their best interest, often by offering premiums that made such transactions highly profitable for all parties involved. While Sir Richard began his investigations in London and Paris, Isabella turned her attention to the domestic aspects of the crisis. Prince Alexander had noticed his mother's distracted mood and questioned her about the sudden flurry of medical consultations and secretive meetings. "Mother, is everything all right?" Alexander asked during their weekly lunch in the palace's smaller dining room. "You seem troubled, and there are rumors among the staff about emergency medical programs and extended leaves of absence." Isabella studied her son's concerned face, remembering her own youth when every palace intrigue had seemed like the end of the world. At 28, Alexander was mature enough to handle difficult truths, but this particular situation required careful explanation. "Catherine's mother is gravely ill," Isabella replied, which was entirely true. "We're exploring new treatment options that may help not only Mrs. Whitmore, but other families facing similar challenges." "And Catherine's leave of absence?" "She needs time to care for her mother and help establish the new medical program. It's a temporary arrangement that benefits everyone involved." Alexander nodded, accepting this explanation, though Isabella could see questions forming in his intelligent eyes. She made a mental note to include him more fully in palace affairs going forward. His earlier suggestions about modernizing the royal collection, while poorly timed in light of recent events, showed a thoughtful approach to the monarchy's future that deserved consideration. As the week progressed, positive news began to filter back from Sir Richard's efforts. The 3 pearls from the Queen Mother's tiara had been located in a private collection in London. The owner, a wealthy businessman who collected royal memorabilia, was initially reluctant to sell, but eventually agreed when Sir Richard offered double what he had paid, along with a signed photograph from Queen Isabella herself. The ruby from the medieval chalice proved more challenging. It had been purchased by a Parisian dealer who specialized in religious artifacts and had already resold it to a private collector in Monaco. The collector, an elderly woman who had lost her husband recently, had purchased the ruby as part of her grief process, believing it connected her to centuries of faith and tradition. Sir Richard's approach to this situation demonstrated his exceptional diplomatic skills. Rather than simply offering money, he arranged for Isabella to write a personal letter to the collector, explaining that the ruby held special significance for the royal family's upcoming memorial service for Isabella's late grandmother. The emotional appeal, combined with a generous financial offer and the promise of a private tour of the palace, convinced the collector to part with the ruby. The medieval silver coins presented yet another challenge, having been sold to a numismatic society in New York that had immediately distributed them to various members. Tracking down each coin required Sir Richard to travel to the United States and negotiate with individual collectors spread across the country. The process was time-consuming and expensive, but his persistence paid off when he managed to recover both coins within 10 days. While Sir Richard worked his magic abroad, Isabella faced a more personal challenge at home. Margaret Whitmore's condition had deteriorated during the stress of the past months, and Dr. Hayes recommended immediate enrollment in the Swiss clinic's experimental program. The transfer would need to happen quickly before Margaret's anxiety made travel impossible. Catherine accompanied her mother on the flight to Switzerland, a journey that was both heartbreaking and hopeful. Margaret had moments of clarity where she seemed to understand that something important was happening, though she couldn't quite grasp the details. During one lucid moment, she took Catherine's hand and said, "You've always been such a good daughter. I'm proud of the woman you've become." The words cut through Catherine like a knife, knowing how far she had fallen from her mother's expectations. Yet they also provided motivation to rebuild herself into someone worthy of such praise. The Swiss clinic proved to be everything Dr. Hayes had promised, and more. The staff was exceptionally trained in dealing with Alzheimer's patients, and Margaret's anxiety decreased noticeably within hours of her arrival. The facility's peaceful setting, combined with cutting-edge treatment protocols, offered genuine hope for slowing the disease's progression. Dr. Elizabeth Hoffman, the clinic's director, was enthusiastic about the research partnership with the Royal Medical Foundation. "Your Majesty's initiative could revolutionize how we approach Alzheimer's care," she told Isabella during a video conference. "The combination of traditional medical treatment with psychological comfort measures has shown remarkable results in our preliminary studies." Back in Valdoria, the charity auction was proceeding smoothly under Marcus's careful oversight. The elderly custodian had risen to the challenge admirably, displaying organizational skills that surprised even Isabella. His attention to detail rivaled Catherine's, and his genuine enthusiasm for the charitable cause inspired the entire staff. "Your Majesty," Marcus reported during one of their daily briefings, "advance interest in the auction is exceeding all expectations. We've received inquiries from collectors across Europe, and several pieces are already generating competitive bidding wars." The auction's success would provide a fitting conclusion to what had become the most challenging period of Isabella's reign. The proceeds would benefit the Children's Hospital while demonstrating the royal family's continued commitment to charitable causes. As the second week concluded, Sir Richard delivered the news Isabella had been hoping for. "Your Majesty, I'm pleased to report that all items have been successfully recovered." The final piece, one of the silver coins, was returned yesterday by a collector in California who was so moved by the story of the Royal Medical Program that he refused any payment whatsoever. The recovered gems were transported back to Valdoria under extraordinary security, accompanied by documentation verifying their authenticity and provenance. Isabella personally oversaw their return to the royal vault, where Marcus carefully restored each piece to its proper place in the crown jewels. Standing before the display case, Isabella marveled at how normal everything appeared. The Queen Mother's tiara gleamed with all its pearls intact, the Star of Valdoria blazed with its original brilliance, and King Edmund's ring bore the sapphire that had witnessed centuries of royal history. To any casual observer, nothing had changed. Yet Isabella knew that everything had changed. The crisis had revealed vulnerabilities in the royal household that needed to be addressed, relationships that needed to be rebuilt, and systems that required improvement. The crown jewels were safe, but the experience had taught her that their security depended on more than locks and alarms. Catherine's new role as Director of Royal Charitable Initiatives was officially announced during a press conference that highlighted the success of the Alzheimer's research program. The media coverage was overwhelmingly positive, presenting the initiative as an example of the monarchy's commitment to addressing modern social challenges. "The royal family recognizes that our greatest treasure is not found in any vault," Isabella stated during the press conference, "but in the health and well-being of our people. This program represents our commitment to supporting families facing the devastating effects of Alzheimer's disease." The announcement generated international interest, with several other European monarchies expressing interest in similar programs. Isabella found herself in the unusual position of having created something genuinely beneficial from what had begun as a crisis of trust and betrayal. As the month drew to a close, Isabella reflected on the lessons learned from this ordeal. The monarchy's strength lay not in the perfection of its representatives, but in their ability to overcome human failings and emerge stronger. Catherine's betrayal had been devastating, but her redemption had the potential to inspire others facing impossible choices. The crown jewels gleamed in their restored glory, but Isabella now understood that their true value lay not in their monetary worth, but in what they represented: continuity, tradition, and the sacred trust between the monarchy and its people. That trust, like the gems themselves, was precious beyond measure and required constant vigilance to protect. 6 months later, Queen Isabella stood in the palace's newly renovated medical wing, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as the first graduates of the Royal Alzheimer's Care Training Program received their certificates. The initiative had grown far beyond its original purpose as cover for Catherine's crisis, evolving into a comprehensive program that trained healthcare workers from across Europe in advanced dementia care techniques. Margaret Whitmore sat in the front row of the small auditorium, her condition remarkably stable thanks to the experimental treatments at the Swiss clinic. While she couldn't fully comprehend the ceremony's significance, she seemed to sense that something important was happening and clapped enthusiastically whenever others did so. Catherine stood beside the podium, wearing the blue sash that marked her new position as Director of Royal Charitable Initiatives. Her transformation over the past months had been remarkable. The guilt and desperation that had consumed her during the dark period of the thefts had been replaced by a focused determination to make meaningful contributions to society. Her work coordinating the medical program had revealed talents for international diplomacy and scientific administration that no one, including Catherine herself, had previously recognized. "Your Majesty," Catherine said as Isabella joined her after the ceremony, "Dr. Hoffman has confirmed that 3 more European medical centers want to join the research consortium. The program will soon span 7 countries and treat over 200 patients annually." Isabella nodded with satisfaction. "And the research findings? Are they proving valuable beyond our initial expectations?" "Extraordinarily so. The combination of traditional medical intervention with psychological comfort protocols has shown a 30% improvement in patient stability over conventional treatments. Medical journals across Europe are requesting publication rights to our preliminary data." This success story stood in stark contrast to the crisis that had spawned it. What began as a desperate attempt to cover up theft had blossomed into legitimate medical advancement that would help thousands of families facing similar challenges to what Catherine had endured. Prince Alexander approached them, carrying a folder of documents that he'd been reviewing with increasing frequency as Isabella gradually expanded his role in palace affairs. The crown jewel crisis had taught her the importance of preparing the next generation for the complex challenges they would inherit. "Mother, I've been reviewing the financial reports from all our charitable initiatives," Alexander said. "The medical program's success has inspired increased donations to our other causes. The Children's Hospital auction alone raised 40% more than last year, and we're receiving requests to establish similar programs for cancer research and veteran support. What's your recommendation?" Isabella asked, genuinely interested in his perspective. "I think we should formalize these initiatives under a royal foundation umbrella, with Catherine overseeing the medical programs and additional directors managing other specialized areas. The monarchy's greatest strength has always been its ability to evolve while maintaining core values." Isabella smiled, remembering her initial resistance to Alexander's suggestions about modernizing the royal collection. His ideas had been premature given the timing, but his underlying instincts about the monarchy's need to adapt and serve had been entirely correct. Dr. Hayes joined their small group, his face beaming with pride at the ceremony's success. At his age, launching a major international medical initiative had seemed impossible just months earlier, yet here they were celebrating tangible results that would outlive all of them. "Mrs. Whitmore asked me to give you something," he told Catherine, producing a small wrapped package. "She had a lucid moment this morning and specifically requested that I present this to you during today's ceremony." Catherine unwrapped the package with trembling hands, revealing a small silver locket that had belonged to her grandmother. Inside was a photograph of Catherine as a young girl, standing beside her mother in the palace library where Margaret had worked for so many years. "She remembers you as her little girl who was going to change the world," Dr. Hayes explained gently. She may not understand the details of what you've accomplished, but she senses that you've done something important and meaningful. Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of gratitude rather than the anguish that had characterized so much of the previous year. The locket represented a connection to happier times, and a reminder that love perseveres even when memory fails. Marcus appeared at Isabella's elbow, his discreet cough indicating that he had an important matter to discuss privately. She excused herself from the group and followed him to a quiet alcove overlooking the palace gardens. "Your Majesty," Marcus said in a low voice, "I've completed the comprehensive security review you requested after last year's incident. I have several recommendations for improving our protocols without creating an atmosphere of distrust among the staff." Isabella had asked for this review as part of ensuring that the crown jewel crisis could never be repeated. While she trusted Catherine completely now, the experience had revealed systemic vulnerabilities that needed to be addressed for the protection of future collections managers and the artifacts they steward. The key improvements involve redundancy and transparency, Marcus continued. Multiple staff members should be present during all vault access. Detailed photographic documentation should occur monthly rather than quarterly, and we should implement random spot checks by external auditors. Will these measures be burdensome for daily operations? Not significantly. The additional protocols will actually enhance the educational and research value of our collection by creating more detailed records. Several universities have already expressed interest in studying our documentation methods. Isabella approved the recommendations immediately. The new protocols would protect both the artifacts and the people responsible for them, creating an environment where financial pressure could never again lead to such desperate decisions. As the afternoon progressed, Isabella found herself reflecting on the profound changes that had occurred since that terrible morning when she first discovered the missing pearls. The crisis had shaken her faith in her closest relationships and forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about the pressures facing those who serve the crown. Yet from that crisis had emerged something unexpectedly powerful. The medical program was saving lives. Catherine had discovered a calling that utilized her talents in ways her previous role never could, and the royal family had demonstrated that even serious mistakes could be overcome through forgiveness, creativity, and commitment to making things right. The charity auction catalog from the previous year lay open on Isabella's desk, displaying photographs of the items that had been sold to benefit the Children's Hospital. Every piece had found new homes with collectors who valued their history and craftsmanship, while the proceeds had funded new pediatric equipment that was already saving young lives. Catherine knocked softly and entered the study, carrying a leather portfolio similar to the one she'd brought on that fateful evening months earlier. But this portfolio contained plans for expanding the medical program rather than auction preparations that masked a terrible secret. "Isabella, I need to ask you something that's been weighing on my mind," Catherine said as she settled into her familiar chair by the fireplace. "Of course. What's troubling you? Do you ever regret the decision to forgive me? Not the practical aspects of how we resolved the crisis, but the personal choice to rebuild our friendship rather than simply ensuring justice was served." Isabella considered the question carefully. It was one she had asked herself many times during the most difficult moments of the past year, particularly when the financial cost of recovery had mounted and the complexity of the cover story had threatened to overwhelm them all. "Regret is the wrong word," Isabella replied finally. "What you did was wrong, and there were consequences that we both had to face. But regret implies that I would choose differently if given the chance, and I wouldn't. The person you've become through this experience is someone who can accomplish things that the old Catherine never could have achieved. But the risk to your reputation, to the crown's integrity, was significant," Isabella acknowledged. "But the monarchy's true strength lies in its capacity for renewal and redemption. We've both learned things about leadership, friendship, and human nature that we never would have discovered through easier circumstances." Catherine nodded, though Isabella could see that she was still processing the weight of what had happened and its ongoing implications. The guilt might never completely disappear, but it had been transformed into a driving force for positive change rather than a destructive burden. "There's something else," Catherine continued. "Prince Alexander mentioned that he's been considering various reforms to royal protocols. Some of his ideas might prevent future situations like mine from developing in the first place." Isabella was aware of her son's proposals, which included more comprehensive support systems for royal employees, regular financial counseling for staff members with elderly parents, and expanded medical benefits that would cover extended care situations. The ideas were practical and compassionate, showing that Alexander had learned important lessons from observing the crisis unfold. His suggestions have merit, Isabella agreed. The monarchy must adapt to serve the people around it, not just the people it governs. As evening approached, Isabella walked through the palace corridors that had witnessed centuries of royal drama. Kings and queens before her had faced scandals, betrayals, wars, and personal tragedies. Each crisis had either strengthened the crown or weakened it, depending on how it was handled and what lessons were learned. The crown jewels sat securely in their vault, their authenticity restored, and their security enhanced. But, more importantly, the people responsible for protecting them were better supported, better trained, and better equipped to handle the pressures that came with such responsibility. Margaret Whitmore's improvement had stabilized into a manageable routine that allowed her to maintain dignity and comfort despite her condition. The medical program continued to expand, offering hope to families across Europe who had previously faced the devastating financial burden of specialized care. Catherine had found her calling in work that combined her organizational abilities with her personal understanding of family medical crises. Her reputation, rather than being destroyed by her mistakes, had been rebuilt around her expertise in creating support systems for others facing similar challenges. Most significantly, the royal family had demonstrated that even serious breaches of trust could be overcome through wisdom, compassion, and commitment to positive change. The monarchy's greatest strength had always been its ability to evolve while maintaining its essential character, and this crisis had provided yet another example of that enduring capacity for renewal. As Isabella prepared for bed that night, she reflected on a conversation she'd had with her grandmother shortly before her death. The elderly queen had spoken about the weight of the crown and the importance of understanding that true royal power lay not in commanding others, but in inspiring them to become better versions of themselves. At the time, Isabella had thought she understood what her grandmother meant. Now, after watching Catherine transform her guilt into purpose and Alexander develop his leadership skills through observation and participation, she truly comprehended the wisdom in those words. The crown jewels would continue to symbolize the monarchy's continuity and tradition, but the real treasures of Valdoria were the people who served it with dedication, faced their failures with courage, and emerged from crisis stronger than before. In the end, that was the greatest legacy any monarch could leave. Not perfect subjects, but resilient ones who understood that redemption was always possible for those willing to do the hard work of making things right.